Rogue Ops takes much inspiration from the likes of Splinter Cell and Metal Gear Solid to create a new adventure that centers around a woman named Nikki. Working on behalf of an organization known as Phoenix, she sets out to seek revenge for her family's death at the hands of a brutal group of radicals. As you would expect from a game of this kind, the player has a whole host of weaponry and gadgets to utilize during each mission, but ammo is pretty scarce throughout each location, so relying on the stealth approach plays a huge part in successfully completing your objectives. The main way you can do this is by sneaking up on enemies and taking advantage of the takedown system. Now what makes it unique is that once executing it, a short button combination appears on the screen. It's essentially a quick time event, but it changes every time you perform it, depending on how much you fill the meter each and every time you execute the attack. It's a neat little system and lends the usual monotonous task of simply pressing a button an added bit of flair. If you're fond of the stealth action genre and have exhausted the usual suspects on the system, Rogue Ops is bound to provide you with hours of entertainment, and although it's nowhere near the same quality of the games that have clearly inspired it, it's still a great game to pick up and play. Dawn of Mana is an action-adventure that sees you taking on the role of a young hero known as Keldric. Joining him on the adventure is a fairy known as Faye, who possesses many abilities that Keldric can utilize throughout the journey. Unlike previous games in the series, Dawn of Mana diverges from the usual 2D action RPG setup, and instead presents itself in full 3D. The first thing that will strike many are the lush and vibrant visuals that help bring the world to life and bring a distinct charm to each and every environment you encounter. Matching this is the gameplay, and this is where Dawn of Mana begins to shine. Keldric has access to a vine-like plant. It functions not only as a sword but also a whip and a slingshot that adds many options when it comes to taking on enemies. One aspect though that makes each encounter unique is the fact that nearly every object in the game, including enemies, are movable. Because of this, any object can be thrown at them, which really comes into play during some of the more challenging boss fights. Now the adventure is split up into 8 separate chapters that all offer their own distinct challenges and objectives, and although the game isn't that long, thanks to a wide selection of collectibles and side activities, there is still plenty to do. So if you've never got around to playing it, Dawn of Mana is well worth giving a go, even to this day. PsyOps The Mind Conspiracy is a third-person shooter that mixes both gunplay and telekinetic abilities to create something entirely unique. As the player, you assume the role of Nick, a veteran soldier who is captured along with his teammates. The adventure sees you breaking out of your captivity and ultimately bringing the group to justice. At the beginning of the adventure, Nick is suffering from amnesia, and throughout the game you slowly start to remember and unlock a variety of abilities, such as being able to manipulate objects with your mind, as well as the ability to drain enemies' life to add to your own, and even summon flames. These aspects of the gameplay really add to each fight, and make each and every one of them truly engaging. As well as these special skills, you also have a whole selection of weapons to add to your arsenal, and mixing the two styles together is the real highlight of the adventure. Visually, PsyOps is quite impressive on the PlayStation 2 as well. Each environment depicts a believable space to explore, with various effects lighting up the screen when the action heats up, and no matter how chaotic it gets, there's not a dropped frame in sight. If you're looking for a unique third-person shooter, PsyOps The Mind Conspiracy is one I can highly recommend. The Sword of Etheria shares much in common with the likes of Devil May Cry, and takes the insanity of hack and slashes to the next level. Let's get the bad out of the way and first talk about the visual presentation, which is pretty lacking to be fair, but the gameplay that is present more than makes up for this shortcoming. Naturally, it's all based around the concept of landing combos, and doing so at insane speeds in order to rack up a high amount of points. What makes it stand out from others on the system is the several computer-controlled characters that aid you in battle. Using them all at the same time to keep combos going is at the center of combat, and the longer you keep these strings going, the more your power bar fills up, which gives you access to mind-blowing super attacks. One of the best aspects of the game are the incredible boss fights that offer more depth to the gameplay, as you and your allies have to discover a way to use the chain combo system to your advantage, mainly by finding something that can build up your power bar and expose the boss's weakness. Now in between missions, you are given the option to upgrade your characters, as well as purchase costumes, elemental upgrades for your weapons, extra item slots, as well as accessories, which help give you an extra edge in battle. Experimenting with the various setups is key to overcoming the many trials that await you. The Tales series has always been one of my favourite RPG franchises. There are so many incredible entries that have released over the years, but one that often gets overlooked is Legendia. It sees players assuming the part of Senel, a young boy who plots out a journey to save his sister from an evil empire, and it all sounds quite cliche, but soon opens up into a larger narrative that encompasses the entire kingdom and the fate of the world as a whole. To be honest, the narrative is one of the best aspects of the game, and it goes a long way in making it a memorable adventure. Now, the combat has always been my favourite aspect of the series, and Legendia does not disappoint. It all takes place in real time and is presented in a side-scrolling manner, and as you would expect, you get to utilise a ton of magical abilities that have the potential to light up the screen, and with several characters joining your party throughout the game, some of the battles can get incredibly hectic. Naturally, you'll be gaining experience points from many of these encounters, which contribute to each of your character's proficiency in battle. A ton of new abilities and moves can be unlocked through the leveling up system that allows you to tailor your character to your specific style of play. Tales of Legendia is a fantastic RPG that has a lot to offer the player. As I mentioned, the story alone is one reason to give it a go, with the tense and intricate battling system only complementing it as well. If you're a fan of the series, this one is a no-brainer and deserves a spot in your collection as well. Maximo vs Army of Zin picks up right where the original left off, and sees the player taking up the fight as Maximo as he continues his search for his lover. This brings him to the Army of Zin, a mechanized group of clockwork warriors powered by trapped human souls. Now, much like any good sequel does, it improves upon everything that was introduced in the first outing, and this time around there is a much bigger emphasis upon combat. Of course, there is still a ton of platforming sections that break up the time spent between each encounter, but during battle is where the experience really comes into its own. There are 3 different attack methods which you can use. You have light attack, heavy attack, and shield attack. By combining different combinations of each of them, the player is able to string together a series of combos and lay waste to anything blocking their path. Of special note are the generous amount of impressive boss fights that litter the adventure. All of them are quite intimidating at first, but given time their weaknesses can be found and exploited. While the original Maximo was often criticised for its insane difficulty, this time around it's much more player friendly. Maximo vs Army of Sin stands as a worthy sequel to one of the most overlooked PS2 games, and is one that you should definitely not pass up. Shadow Heart's Covenant is one of the few RPGs that manages to capture the best of nearly every aspect that makes up the genre. From a compelling and intriguing story to the engrossing and rewarding combat system, it has always remained as one of my go-to games on the console. The game picks up right after the events of the previous adventure, with players once again taking up the role of Yuri, who is now joined by Karen, a like-minded individual who both stop at nothing to bring balance to the world. The main aspect that stands out is the turn-based combat system. It all revolves around something known as the Judgment Ring, which is visualized as a disc on the screen. When performing an action, several hit zones appear on the disc, and you are tasked with hitting one dead center in order to perform a much more successful attack. It's a really engaging feature that manages to make each encounter, no matter how big or small, all the more engaging, and with the collection of abilities on offer, there are plenty of choices when it comes to taking on each situation. If you haven't got round to playing the first entry, it's not entirely required in order to enjoy the sequel, so if you're looking for a unique RPG to try out, Shadow Heart's Covenant more than fits the bill. Samurai Western is a sort of spin-off to Way of the Samurai, another often overlooked game that was brought to us by Acquire. This time around, the gameplay takes on a much more fast-paced action approach and succeeds in producing a competent adventure. It sees the player filling the part of Gojiro, a samurai who travels to America to locate his brother and discover why he abandoned the code of the samurai. Now, gameplay is the real star of the show and sees you possessing a wide array of both offensive and defensive means in which to bring each enemy down, the most common being your sword, which plays a huge role in the game. The combat is all combo based and allows the player to string together several attacks that can result in turning the tide of a battle in the blink of an eye. But just as important as going on the offensive is, evading and holding your own also plays a huge part in each encounter. There's a handy dodge mechanic that opens up the possibility of countering incoming blows. Putting all of these elements together results in each fight feeling just as engaging as the last, and it soon becomes the best aspect of the game. You have the option to select unlock several accessories and swords which all come with their own unique benefits, as well as a certain amount of points that you can earn after dealing with enemies, which will contribute to you acquiring better gear and unlocking hidden bonuses such as extra stages. In my eyes, Way of the Samurai is the better experience, but Samurai Western still offers up enough to warrant a purchase. The Bouncer is essentially a beat-em-up that centers around a group of characters that call themselves Fate. After one of the group's friends are kidnapped by an evil corporation known as Mikado, they set out to ultimately locate them and bring down the organization in the process. Once in the action, it sees you traversing many urban environments as you encounter a wide selection of enemies that will do nothing but to try and stop you dead in your tracks. Now there's 3 characters that you get to utilize throughout the game. Each of them possess their own unique advantages depending on the situation at hand, and before triggering a fight, you get to choose which one you would like to use, so getting used to each is essential to truly understanding how to fight in the most efficient way possible. One aspect that helps set the game apart from many of the other beat-em-ups on the system was the inclusion of light RPG elements that add an extra layer of depth to the gameplay. Through fighting, your character will gain something known as bouncer points, or BP for short. After each fight you will receive a set amount of these points, as well as some extra depending on how you performed. They can be used to upgrade several aspects of your character, from the amount of life you possess to your power and defense, as well as new, more powerful moves that help deal with the onslaught of enemies that will be thrown your way. Although it's not the best beat 'em up by any means, the Bouncer is still a competent experience that well and truly deserves a look. Shadow of Memories is an action-adventure with the concept of time travel at the center of the experience. It sees players taking on the role of a man known as Ike, who gets murdered right at the start of the game. A mysterious creature rescues him and arms him with a device known as a digipad that allows you to essentially control time. Now the game is broken up into a series of chapters that all take place in different time periods. The basic gameplay will see you exploring each area and interacting with the various NPCs that occupy the space. Now there's not much in the way of combat, with the game instead focusing on a ton of puzzles to advance the story. Your digipad plays a huge role in singling out specific periods in time that can be manipulated through your actions and ultimately push the story to its conclusion. In order to use the device, you need to locate several crystals scattered throughout each environment, and with there only being a limited amount of time to explore before you meet your untimely death again, it creates a real level of urgency that can be felt throughout the entire adventure. Now there's several endings as well, which help the overall replay value of the game and warrants subsequent playthroughs to see everything that it has to offer. If you never got round to playing this when it first released, it is one game that I highly recommend. Well, that does it for today's video. Don't forget to hit subscribe and follow me on all of the socials, and you can even join our community on Discord. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I will catch you next time.